Hey everyone, Pastor George here with today's Bible study recap. And today in Bible study, we looked at the final chapter of Judges, Judges 21. So we finished up with Judges, and wow, what a wild ride it has been, right? Again, this is one of my favorite books of the Bible, and it's because of what I think it tells us about God and what it tells us about ourselves and how it points to Christ. And we're going to talk about that at the end. But I think it's worth thinking about because Judges is one of those books that a lot of us don't spend any time with. It's in the Old Testament. It's generally not considered stuff that's appropriate for kids. So outside of a few stories like Samson and maybe Gideon, you don't really hear about what happens in Judges all that much. And even then, those stories are usually highly censored and curated, and so we usually forget what actually is going on in this book. And remember, the whole point of Judges is summed up in the very last verse of Judges, which is, in those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Now, we're going to talk about more what that means, but that is what is going to sum up this final chapter, because this final chapter is no less horrific and stupid on the part of the Israelites than any other chapter in this book. Like, you just think it can't get worse, and it does. I don't know why they're like this. Well, I do, because they're like us. So this begins with the Israelites wondering, how could this evil have come upon us? It's like, dude, were you like living under a rock for the last couple hundred years? Like, this is obvious how this could happen. They've just fought a civil war. They've almost wiped out one of the tribes, the tribe of Benjamin. It's just been reduced to about 600 men, and so and it's important, men. Okay, men. That doesn't mean like men is in like men and women. It means men is in men, and so they're all there and they're moping and they're sad that this has happened. And so they think amongst themselves and they go, well, we need to correct this, right? We need to correct this thing that has happened. We need to restore Benjamin because it's not right that one of our tribes is almost dead. And so what do they decide to do? Well, they take an account of who has shown up and who hasn't, and they realize that one of the cities, a place called Jabesh Gilead, has not shown up. And that's probably because it's located on the east side of the Jordan. They weren't threatened by Benjamin, so they didn't bother sending anyone to the meeting that happened before the Israelites went to go destroy Benjamin. And so what they decide to do is they decide to get wives for Benjamin, and they're going to go to Jabesh Gilead. They're going to kill all of the men. They're going to kill any of the women who are married or who have ever slept with a man. They're going to kill the children. And then they're going to take whatever young women who aren't married and have been married, virgins, and they're going to take them and they're going to give them to the men of Benjamin as wives. That's what they decide to do, right? And this is because the tribes have sworn a vow. We don't hear about this until now. A rash vow, which is another common theme in Judges, where they said, we're not going to give any of our daughters to Benjamin as wives. This is when they were probably really upset. And you can imagine, like, times when people are upset, they make these stupid promises and then they end up having to go back on them and things like that. But they try and hold to it as much as possible. So they go, well, instead, let's just attack a group of Israelites that didn't show up, kill them, take their daughters, and use them as wives. Again, you can see that this is not being sanctioned. All right, this is everyone looks at these stories in the Old Testament of the violence, especially in Judges, and think that God is sanctioning this. He's not, right? The last violence God sanctioned was against Benjamin, and we're going to talk, and that's to bring justice on them, and also to bring justice on Israel for all the evil stuff that they're doing. So they go and they get these women from Jabesh Gilead. They kill everyone. They bring back these young women. They give them to Benjamin, but it's not enough women. And this then they have to do, well, okay, well, what are we going to do here? Or how are we going to get more? And so they talk about how there's this breach in Israel. And this is a breach caused by God to bring justice on Benjamin, and they want to repair it. And I think this says a lot about us as humans, where we want to repair or correct what we think God did that's unjust or unjust, right? That we are somehow better arbiters of truth and justice than God is, and that's what Israel is trying to do here, right? So what do? Well, they go, well, how about this? We said that we aren't going to give any of our daughters to Benjamin as wives, but what if they did it without our permission? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, right? They say, how about this? How about when all the young women of Shiloh go out, you guys lay in wait and go and kidnap them and then make them your wives that way? Because this is basically they're trying to pull the wool over God's eyes here or trick him, right? They're saying, well, we didn't technically give you them as wives, you took them. And we're just not going to do anything about that. So all the young girls come out of Shiloh, and then the guys of Benjamin wait, and they capture them and bring them home, and make them wives, right? And that's bad, right? In all sorts of ways. You could clearly see that this may have been unwanted on part of the women, and that certainly carries with it quite a bit of baggage and sin. And so the Israelites, and this is how the book of Judges ends, right? The book of Judges ends with the Israelites treating each other terribly, right? They put Jabesh Gilead to the sword. They do what they were supposed to do to the Canaanites, but they do it to each other. They allow their daughters to be taken and used by men of their tribe in order to get around other vows. It's just so stupid. So stupid. And it ends with the words, in those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And I would think, like, now that we're at the end of Judges, it's worth thinking about, as you're kind of thinking through this, is what surprised you about Judges, right? And I can't answer that question for you. But the second one that I have is, what does Judges teach us about ourselves? And I think if we're supposed to be honest with ourselves, we are supposed to realize that even though hopefully none of us have committed any of the grievous sins that Israel commits in this book, that we are not that different from the Israelites, in the sense that we have to understand that just because we live in the year 2023 doesn't make us better people inherently than the Israelites who are living, more than 1,000 years before Christ. What it teaches us is that when we go our own direction in life, when we believe that God is not really king, when we believe we can do whatever we want, this is the results. And I think this bears itself out in our society with all the different social issues we have. I think it bears it out in other countries that we can kind of compare ourselves to and see those that have not only rejected God, but also the values that derive from the Bible, right? And we can see what happens in countries that do that. And it has nothing to do with like West versus East or whatever. I think this is just as true in Europe as it is in like China, right? I think you can see the kind of similarities of evil pattern show up when we disgrace or put aside God. And what does Judges teach us about God? I think amazingly, in the book of Judges, God is still faithful to his covenant of Israel. Even though they have broken it many times over, even though they are evil people, right? God still holds to his side of the bargain. He brings judgment on them, absolutely, but he understands that out of this group of people, he's going to bring great good to the world. And I think that it can remind us that God can still use us, even though we are broken and evil, to do good things. And that God can use this evil ultimately to set up something good. Because as you know, there's kind of this political undertone, if you've been watching these videos. In Judges, there's this political undertone. And that undertone is Saul, David, and the kingship of Israel. You have the tribe of Judah kind of being held up. That's David's tribe. You have the tribe of Benjamin not being held up. That's Saul's tribe. In a big way, you see that this week. And that this is kind of the author who's probably writing under King David to give a history of Israel, showing his allegiance and showing how much better the house of Judah is over the house of Benjamin, right? How much better the house of David is over the house of Saul. And I think if we just looked at that cynically, we would miss kind of some of the important things that are going on here. Because while this had a political fulfillment for some of the Israelites, we know from his later histories that David would not perfectly fulfill this. And in fact, Israel would go back to doing many of the same things that their ancestors were doing. So this hope in a temporal king, and the people that were living during David's time kind of experiencing this golden age in Israel, not realizing that if they don't stick to the Lord's commands, they're going to end up in the same place. And this promise that is given here, this king that is going to make everything right, is not fulfilled in David, but it is fulfilled in Christ, right? Also from David's line to the house of Judah, the tribe of Judah. And that it is in him that we are actually able to have peace, to understand what is true and right, and to be held, and to ultimately have our sins held accountable and through the cross, but also to be called to sin no more, and to continually remind ourselves of that, right? That we have this continual reminder from generation to generation that we are not supposed to end up like these people in Judges, even though we are very tempted to. I think if we don't admit that to ourselves, we even come closer to doing what they end up doing. So that's what the book of Judges is about. It's a very honest look at humanity without God. And I think that that's a really important thing, right? You have bright spots, you have people that try, but ultimately everyone is flawed, and that's us. And there's great comfort in knowing that, some of these heroes of the faith are flawed people. We can never forget that we ultimately are liable to God and to Christ about how we have acted, and whether or not we have truly made them king of our lives. So thank you everyone for joining me on this. We're going to start a new book next week, and I haven't quite decided yet. I know that there's cries for something from the New Testament, but I don't know. We'll see. Either way, thank you for joining me, and have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Peace out.